Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, we'll start the Zevachim daf Nun Aleph. We are going to begin on Nun Aleph Amud Aleph by the dot, which is about 6 lines from the top. So we've been learning. The question is, if you have a Kal V'chomer, can you learn out a Kal V'chomer to another Kal V'chomer, Gzer Shava to Gzer Shava? And now we're talking about with a binyan av. So Davar Halamed Binyan av. You have something that was learned out from a binyan av. Ma'u Shilman Behekesh. Gzer Shava v'Kal V'chomer. So can you learn out all these other things once the starting point is a binyan av? So binyan av pashit ma'achada. We can at least answer one of them. Why do we say that lun badam kosher? Why do we say that when it comes to dam, which was left over at night, says Rashi, this is going to be later on Daf Pei Daled. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he makes this drush of Zaisia Oila Har'el Miyutin. So the fact that it says it's coming to exclude. Prat L'nishcha Tapolayla. So he said that when it comes to shchita at night, or we saw this before also, the nishmach dama, the blood was spilled, or the shiyatza dama chutz l'kilayim, or the dam was left and brought out of the wrong place. So these are all different places. These are all exclusions of this pasuk. So upayrich maro l'haitzias elu l'hashras ashar. Why are these the worst situations and the rest are not? So why do we say that when it comes to the dam, for example, that is kosher? In other words, how come when it comes to these other things that you shechted at night, or the blood spilled, or it was yaitze, that that's when it's problematic, but not this. Sharilon be'imor in kosher, because we know that if you leave over the sacrificial parts, it's still kosher. Says Rashi, meaning shim olu yard, that if it went up on the mizbech, we're not going to take it down. So now the question is, how do we know that lon be'imor in kosher, shahari lon be'basar kosher? Because we know that if you would leave the meat over, then that also is going to be kosher. Yaitse, how do we about yaitse? Hoya b'yaitse kosher b'bama. Because we find that there's certain dinim that don't always apply. We don't always have these stringencies. For example, when it comes to a bama, b'shas heter bamais, if you would, there's no din yaitse because there's no chutzim kaimai, because there's no walls when it comes to a bama. So therefore that's the exception when it comes to that. Tamei hoyabahut b'avodah sibor. Also, like all these other psulim were more lenient because even though we don't want it to be tamei, but we have a din of tomahut b'tzibura. Chutz l'zmanoi hoyel piguloi. So interestingly enough, that when it comes to chutz l'zmanoi, which of course is a problem, right? It's an issue of pigul. There's an issue of kares if you eat it afterwards. But it's only, as we said, it says lo yechashev, I think that's the drasha, that it has to be that everything else is fine with the carbon. The only issue is that you had a machshava b'shashchita of chutz lizmanoi, which means, therefore, it actually is, even though it's problematic, but it's less problematic because it shows that everything else had to be kosher with the carbon. We compare the two. Shekibul psulin. We know that in the event that someone who's does the kabbalah sadam is pasul, the zarkin damon bahanach psulin the chazah avodas sibor. So we say that when these psulin that would do the zrika, says Rashi, machshirina the chazah avodas sibor. It is fit for the tzibur to kohen tameh. So we find that even though he's apostle, sometimes he's allowed to do it. Assuming that, again, like for example, he's a kohen and he's tameh. So the Gemara says, one said, "V'chi dan and davar shlo bachshiro medavar shibachshiroi," says Rashi. So we're learning out the imorim, the sacrificial parts, shlo bachshiro menolim so menon b'baser dehachshiro, because the basar becomes mutter to eat, and that's the whole purpose of it. So says Rashi, v'su heichi yolef. How can you learn Yaitse b'mikdash mi yaitse b'bama? Just because we're lenient when it comes to a bama, there's no din yaitse. That doesn't apply to a mikdash. Shekul yaitsehu she'in sham kilayim. Obviously, there's no din of yaitse because there's no walls to potentially, right? It's al pnei asad. It's the middle of the field. So how could you learn this drasha to say, oh, we're more lenient by the mikdash by yaitse because we find it by bama, but Bama Metzias just doesn't have walls, so obviously there's no din yaitse by that. So Tana, so we learn Mizais Tairas Oila Reba Samachle. So the fact is, the drasha is that we learn out from this pasuk, Im Olu, if these things went up, we don't take them down. It says Rashi B'chol Ra'ayis halolu mishum demamayit mezais hiya oila tlas psuli mais mehanach maishna hani mahani the ikr mikrav yismachta be'almahu. Okay, so now the Gemara goes back to what we were talking about when it came to the Shiri Hadam, the status of the leftover bloods. So this brings us way back, well, not too way back, but it's the first Mishnah. Okay, so let's find where it is. So it says that we've been talking about how the karbanos have to be shechted in the north, and the animal has to be in the north, the person has to be in the north. By Kabbalah, the kohen also has to be in the north. It says, we talked about the shchitas, the part of the Sarer Shemikippurim, which of course has different blood applications, in which we say V'imul Nosalo Ikev, fine. And then part of Sram Masrim and the Sraf Mishkan Basafain, V'damatun Hazoya Pareichas Vel Mizbach Hazahav, so we talked about that. Matanach Mem Makemis, Shiri Hadam. So here we are, Mem Zayin Mebez. The leftover bloods, it's on the outer mizbeach, because the inner mizbeach doesn't even have a yisoid. So it's only on the western part of the mizbeach. And it says, but if you don't do it, fine. So let's look at the Gemara on this. So the Gemara wonders, how do we know that that's the proper place for the leftover bloods to be spilled? So my time is Omer Kra. Because the pasuk says, and let's look at this whole pasuk, Vayikra Daled. It says regarding the part Kohen Mashiach. It says V'noisen HaKohen Men Adam, that the Kohen will give from the blood. He'll put it on the corners of the mizbeach, Kataris Asavim. Asher ba'oil moed v'es kol adam hapar yishmach yisad mizbach. All the blood will be spilled on, poured onto the side mizbach oila. It says it clearly. Asher Pesach Ol Moed. So it tells us it's supposed to be poured on the sod Asher Pesach Ol Moed. So what does that mean? It means Hahu de Pagabaresha, where he reaches first, because he already did the blood applications, and now he's leaving the Heichel, and therefore the first place that he hits on the Heichel is going to be in the west corner. Tanabanan. El Yisoid Mizbach Oila. So what do we learn out? Vo Yisoid Mizbach Panimi. That it has to be placed, the Shiri Hadam, on the Mizbech Oila, namely the outer Mizbech, and not the inner Mizbech. El Yisoid Mizbach Oila. What do we learn out also from this pasuk? So Ein Loi Yisoid Panimi Atzmai. There is no Yisoid by the inner Mizbeach. El Yisoid Mizbeach Oila, the third drasha, Tein Yisoid Mizbeach Shel Oila. That there should be a Mizbeach in the Mizbeach should have Yisoid, and that's where it should be placed regarding the Oila. So, on this says Rashi, El Yisoid Mizbeach Oila. So Chamesh Parshios Hein B'chatas. It actually has 5 different sections about a Karban Chatas. One is the Par Mashiach, Vishel Helam, Shehin Panimis, right? Those are brought inside, and then you have the Shel Sa'ir Nasi, when the king sins. Vishel Keveses Yachid, when it comes to a individual who sins, he has to bring either a kiss or a seira. Sheiras Yachid Shein Chitzainis. So it mentions about the kissa or the seira by the individual. And again, a king brings a sa'ir, male. So Mishtei HaPanimius, we're regarding the 2 inner ones, Uasir Nasi Ksiv, in regard to the Nasi, it says that Rashi tells us, B'shvicha Shirayim El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah. So by 3 of the places it says that, V'shtayim HaChetzonim Ksiv El Yisod Mizbech Stama, right? It doesn't mention, right? There's no mention of the word Yisod. It doesn't say Yisod over there. The Kedarish Tana Tlosa El Mizbech Ha'olah Lama. So why does it mention the Yisod 3 other times? So that's the whole drasha, to tell you these 3 different things. El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah Shel Par Kol Mashiach Lo Yisod Mizbech HaPnimi, that it's got to be put not on the Yisod of the inner one. And the second El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah is Shel Par Eda Shin Talmud Lomer Eda El Yisod Pnimi Atzma Eda Yisod Pnimi Atzma, that just doesn't have one. She'omer El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah B'ser Nasi She'in Talmud Lomer She'im as She'ira V'lo Kibo Mizbech HaPnimi Shir Mizbech Chitzon Yikabo. Then you should put it on the outer one. There is no inner Yisod, says Rashi. Imkain Ma Talmud Lomer El Yisod. So to tell you, Yitain Yisod L'Mizbecha Shel Oila. Okay. Okay, so that's again the whole idea. These are not the same pasuk. It's said in 3 different places. 2 by the that which is brought inside and 1 outside. Okay, so Eno Ella Mizbecha Shel Oila Yisod. Maybe it's just telling you that it's supposed to be on the Yisod, that there is on the outer one there is a Yisod. So Mishmul Kavachaymer. Ma Shirayim Shem Mechaprin. So the Shirayim, as we say, they're not Mechaper, because this is evil Nasal Ikev to Udin Yisod. Nonetheless, we see clear from these psukim that the Shirayim need to be put on the Yisod of the Mizbech. So Tchilus Oila, when it comes to the actual beginning of the blood applications, Shemachaperes, that dam actually is mechaper. So in a din shetu the side certainly needs to be on the side. So Rabbi Kiva Mashirayim Shein Mechaperin Dein Boin LeKapara Tunul Yisod. Why don't you say this? The Shirayim which are not mechaper, they don't cause any kapara, but you still need to be in the Yisod. So Tchios Oilish Mechaper Sabal Kapara Edu Din Shetu Unulis Yisod. So it should definitely require Yisod. So Yimkin Matamunam El Yisod Mizbach Oila. So what does that come to tell you? Tein Yisod Lu Mizbach Shel Oila. Then again, there should be Yisod on the the Mizbech of the Oila. Okay, let's look at question TA1. Begemari Yolaf Mitrei Kroy El Yisod Mizbach Oila Mute Mizbech Pnimi, to exclude the inner one. So Madul Sag Bechad Kra. So one pasuk is to tell you Shol Yitin El Yisod HaPnimi. Don't put it on the inner Mizbech, and so that's what you would maybe think. Kamashmon Trei Kroy the Mizbech HaPnimi Ein Lo Yisod. It's not telling you don't put it on the Yisod in the inner Mizbeach. The second pasuk is telling you that the reason why you don't put it on the inner, but you put it on the outer, is because only the outer one has a Yisod. The inner one doesn't even have a Yisod to start with. So that's the reason why. Okay. Which is the same question as TB4. So let's mark that down. This is Nun Aleph and Aleph, and let's see what I wrote. Chad Lafuki Mizbech Panimi Doloi. It's not put there. The Chad She'en Yisod B'Mizbech HaPanimi. There just isn't one. The Chad, no, I wrote 3. L'chayvi ha'oila b'shar karbonos l'inyan hashirayim shel karbonos. Okay. I don't think you needed to write that. So I'm just going to cross that out. Okay. Okay. But otherwise, good job. Okay. Let's look at question 2 also. Begimel karbonos nemer shvicha shirayim el yesod mizbach ha'oila. Well, my hilchasa nichtavu. So I'm not sure why I didn't mark this down. This is what we just talked about. So this is question 2. Lafuki panimi lekuva, that the inner one is not ma'akev. Also, the ain't lo panimi yisod, that there is no yisod at all. Rabbi shvicha shirayim l'oila, to include the shvicha shirayim of the oila l'chol damim hachitzainim, for all outer bloods, so that it also has to be done in that fashion. That was question 2. Okay, so basically the same question. All right, let's move. We may have a very long daf on Amud Beis, so we got to move. Okay, let's keep going. So that was that. Okay. Tain Yisod Mizbech Shal. So Amar Mar El Yisod Mizbach Vol Yisod Mizbach Hapanimi Haba Boy Laguf Hey Ma'asher Pasach Al Moed Nafka. So we're not from that pasuk. Okay. El Yisod Mizbach Oila. So what do we learn out from that? As we continue to Nun Alphabet Beis, I was obviously joking. It's a very short daf. That doesn't mean that it's not a beautiful taisus over here. Tain Yisod Mizbech Shal Oila. So again, what that means, let's see if there's a Rashi on this to make sure that we are saying this clean. So let's go to this Rashi. Tain Tyrus Shvichas Shirayim. You should put the Shirayim on the Yisod L'Hilchos Mizbecha Shel Oila, when it comes to the laws of the Oila. Shei HaMizbech Ta'un B'Oila B'Chol Damim, when it comes to the oil and all their bloods, HaNitanim Alav Shvicha Shirayim El Yisod, that all other karbanos need to be there. Im Nisha B'Kli Klum, if there's any blood left, Kishe Zayrek Mimenu Shtei Zrikos Shtei Kronos Yishbechun El Yisod. After you finished, then you should be spilling the rest onto the Yisod. Mishum Deba Oila Luksiv Shvicha Shirayim. Because why do we mention about oila? Because it doesn't mention oila at all in any of these psukim. So therefore, that's an extra riboy that also, when it comes to oila, that it has to be put on the yisod. After all the other blood applications. Okay, so doesn't look like there's any Rashis on this daf except for this girsa. Tein yisod mizbech oila. So he's just the way it's written. So how do you lumli? Why do you need all these psukim? Lamli kroli shirayim. Shirayim habroi avin lahu. Right? So, I understand, like these shirayim, they're already completed, right? On the outside. Maybe you should do it the other way around. So, in other words, maybe the inner one goes to the outer one goes to the inner one. It's not shaykh to say that, right? You can't say that because there is no inner yisod. It says there's no inner yisod, so obviously the outer one is not going to have to be put on the inner one either. Okay. Oh, eno el mizbach shel oila yehelu yisod miksiv el yisod oila el yisod mizbach oila ksiv. If it said it that way, have a mina bizkifa el yisoid. Says Rashi, bizkifa the yisoid. She yizrok, when you sprinkle tchilas matanais ha'oil at the very beginning of the sprinkling, be'alias amma. You would think you should put it by amma shemin haaretz, an amma from the ground. Ad hachanisa shehi knois ama, because it goes in, goes up and goes in. Tukula hi ama bein bagava bein bachanisa yisoid mekaria. You would think that when we talk about the Yesod, it's not just this, it's also the upper, because there's different levels. So maybe it's also talking about the height, not necessarily, it could be talking about the horizontal, or is it talking about the vertical, or maybe it's both, right? So even biskifa, zoikefa is like when it's standing up. So hash nechsiv al yisod mizbach oila agagod yisod, right, on the top. So zikifa means like standing up like this part, but the yisod means like this on the roof of the gag. So it's teaching us the proper location where on the yisod it should be placed, not this way, but like this. Ad kan.